Week 10 Fantasy Football Recap. What you need to know. Week 10 brought plenty of surprises and shakeups in the world of fantasy football. Here are the key takeaways and what fantasy managers need to keep an eye on. Dallas Cowboys struggling without Dak Prescott. The Cowboys were completely outmatched by the Eagles. Cooper rushed through for just 32 yards. And even when Trey Lance came in, things didn't improve. CeeDee Lamb received 10 targets but only managed 21 yards with no touchdowns. Given Dak Prescott's likely season-ending injury, Lamb's fantasy value is suddenly in question. Managers may need to think twice about starting him going forward. Jalen Hurts continues to shine. Jalen Hurts delivered another stellar performance, throwing for 2 touchdowns and rushing for 2 more in the Eagles' dominant win over Dallas. Saquon Barkley had a quiet day as Hurts vulture a couple of short TDs. But Barkley remains a top fantasy option. Jared Goff struggles, but Lions pull off the win. Jared Goff had a nightmare game with 5 interceptions. But Sam Laporta had a breakout performance before leaving with a shoulder injury. C.J. Stroud also struggled with 2 interceptions. But Nico Collins should return soon to give Stroud a boost. Brock Purdy and 49ers shine. Brock Purdy continues to impress, passing for 353 yards and 2 touchdowns in a close win against the Buccaneers. Christian McCaffrey returned to workhorse duties, handling 20 opportunities, while George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk both had solid fantasy performances. Purdy's continued development makes him a viable QB2 in fantasy leagues. Joe Mixon keeps delivering. Joe Mixon didn't have a huge yardage game, 46 yards on 25 carries. But he continues to find the end zone, adding his 8th touchdown of the season. He remains one of the safest RB picks in fantasy. Kyler Murray bounces back. Kyler Murray posted a big game with 266 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, 1 rushing, finishing as a top 5 fantasy QB. James Conner also had a productive day with 80 receiving yards, continuing to be the lead back for Arizona. Bijan Robinson breaks out. Bijan Robinson had his best game of the season with 116 yards and 2 touchdowns, making him the RB1 for fantasy this week. Drake London was also heavily involved in Atlanta's offense, leading the team in targets. Chuba Hubbard dominates in Germany. In the game against the Giants in Germany, Chuba Hubbard had a career-high 137 rushing yards and 34 opportunities, finishing as the RB2 of the week. He's a must-add for fantasy managers, especially with Miles Sanders still sidelined. Tennessee Titans and Will Levis. Will Levis had arguably his best performance of the season, throwing for 2 touchdowns and finishing with a solid 7.6 yards per attempt. Calvin Ridley was targeted heavily, catching 2 touchdowns, which bodes well for his fantasy value down the stretch. Justin Herbert and J.K. Dobbins. Justin Herbert didn't throw a touchdown but rushed for 1, helping salvage his fantasy day. J.K. Dobbins had a solid workload, although he faced competition from Gus Edwards for goal line touches. Dobbins remains a solid RB2 in fantasy leagues. Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid's injury. Josh Allen had 280 yards but no touchdowns passing, though he ran 1 in. Dalton Kincaid left the game with a knee injury, which could impact the Bills' passing game going forward. Kincaid has had his fair share of uncatchable targets this season, so his absence could make Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis more valuable. Travis Kelce keeps delivering. Travis Kelce continues to be one of the most reliable tight ends in fantasy football, catching 8 passes for 64 yards and a touchdown. Patrick Mahomes has been throwing fewer deep balls this season, but Kelce remains his go-to weapon in the red zone. Broncos backfield shakeup. Javonte Williams saw limited work, with Audric Estimé leading the way with 14 carries. Estimé is now a must-add in deeper leagues, especially if Williams's role continues to shrink. Quick recap. Dallas Cowboys are in disarray without Dak Prescott, and CeeDee Lamb's fantasy value is now uncertain. Jalen Hurts is a top-tier QB, offering consistent production through both the air and on the ground. Bijan Robinson had a breakout game, becoming the RB1 of the week. Chuba Hubbard emerged as a top RB with a huge performance in Germany and should be on every fantasy manager's radar. Kyler Murray had a strong showing, and James Conner remains a top fantasy option for Arizona. Calvin Ridley and Will Levis are poised for strong finishes to the season. Justin Herbert and J.K. Dobbins are reliable but have a little uncertainty, especially around goal line touches. Travis Kelce continues to be a top tight end and the go-to target for Mahomes. Make sure to monitor injuries and other news closely as we head into Week 11. Keep an eye on potential waiver wire pickups and continue adjusting your lineup based on matchups and player health.